Hello, and welcome back to Season 4 of the Fresh Finds Podcast, the show about discovering new music with good people. I'm Ryan. In this episode, I'm joined by Dan Macy, who is a musician, producer, and a very active member of the DIY Emo and Cybgrind communities. How are you doing?
I'm doing phenomenal, and that is probably the best way I've ever heard anyone describe all the things I have done, honestly.
Well, it's interesting because, you're not in a band in, the traditional sense. You do a lot of, production. You do covers on, YouTube and things like that. And then you really, you have a presence where you support other artists a lot. And so that was, the best way that I could come up with for that. So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, kind of talk about who you are, the projects that you work on, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm Dan Macy. That's not my real name either. My real name is Donovan Massey. Let me pull the curtain back on that a little bit. And I make best described as electronic emo adjacent music. I have yet to figure out a good way to put a box around anything I usually do. But for the most part, I am helping with a bunch of different DIY collectives or groups such as Cybgrind or Emo in production, mixing, mastering. Also make the YouTube channels and make remixes for a bunch of different sick and cool people.
Yeah, and you actually, just a few months ago, I don't have it in my notes, but just a few months ago, released an album of remixes from mostly DIY emo bands. It was called The Only Love Letter I'll Write, or something like that, right?
Yep.
So how did that come about? What was kind of the process? It's very clearly these are bands that mean a lot to me and I want to do something with it. But was there a lot of, how many of them did you reach out to beforehand? Were there any that just kind of started out as just I'm just going to fuck around, and then you're actually this is kind of cool, I'll send it to them, that sort of thing?
So I saw basically a lot of different artists I look up to, and once you start going back to our earlier catalogs, it's they had remix albums, and they done a bunch of different random remixes that you typically wouldn't expect an artist like Porter Robinson, for example, would make. So I really wanted to do a remix album to kind of celebrate the communities that I am coming up through and helping out.
Okay.
Because it was just the community aspect of DIY has really helped me in figuring myself out, plus going through anxiety of being an artist and just being a person around others, and seeing such a supportive group of people made me really want to do something too. So I had these two ideas of I want to do a remix album, and I also want to do a really cool project to promote really cool artists and the community that has been surrounding me and pushing me as an artist and as a person, and really
Sure.
helped me through that. So that's kind of how that initial concept came to be. And then past that, I just posted on Twitter being hey, does anyone want me to remix their songs? And that is how 90-ish% of the artists I chose was selected from that, or I just added them on Twitter under that one tweet. And that's how that original list began. And then I just started working through all the remixes, which the record is basically every remix is a different genre. So I was seeing if bands liked a certain genre, and then I was sending them demos to be hey, is there anything you want me to change of this? Do you want me to do XYZ? Or are you vibing with this? And that's how the project from start to finish happened. So At the beginning, it was here is this concept, start from nothing, and then see where it goes, essentially.
Were there any bands that just did not at all like the direction that it was going in, and you kind of started from scratch, or was everybody really no, this is pretty sick, actually, just kind of keep going how you're going with it?
I wouldn't say any band in particularly was oh, this is awful, oh, what did you do?
I wouldn't expect that, but yeah.
But in terms of that, it was a lot of me going, I don't think this is my best work that I'm putting out there to these wonderful artists. So there's like multiple times where I just like scrapped a version of it just because I wasn't like proud of it, and then like sent them another version. A great example of that is the Red Sun Hyperpop remix of Red Sunfo, because the original version of it is like this really weird like 5/8 time thing that makes absolutely like no sense, at least like how I remember that version going. And I was like, maybe I need to like reel it back in and restart and try a different idea, and then see like what I feel happy with presenting to people. And then like most of the decisions I made for the most part was like really enjoyed by all the artists.
That's awesome. I also really like that, like, it's a really fun remix album too, because there's a lot of like really good, like groovy type of stuff, but there's also just like some samples like before different drops and things like that that absolutely had me just laughing out loud at like how ridiculous and funny it was. Like, I think that the Red Sun one in particular, if I recall, had like a couple of just like absolutely ridiculous like samples before the drop and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to keep that like hyper pop culture of like XD random, but also keep like that Red Sun like Twitter presence too, where it's just like, here is this like meme, but then here's like the actual music part behind the meme. So that was kind of like my thought process on that.
Well, because they have a lot of like, you know, kind of like gamer MLG almost type of memes, like with like the Faker sample and like stuff like that, where it's like, these are, you know, professional gamers and like that kind of stuff, so it really like lends itself to that a lot. I also thought that it was interesting how like some of them were based around like sampling the song and kind of chopping it up, and then others were almost like recreating it in a way. Like I think the Harrison Gordon one, if I recall, I don't know if that samples a whole lot of it aside from like the vocals. It's mostly like 8-bit kind of like recreation type of deal.
With that one, I like retranscribed like the bass part and then the vocals, and then I was just like, I'm going to try to make this as close to a Kirby song as physically possible. So I used like the Kirby sound font for literally all the instruments plus the vocals, and like did all this like small minute things to it that was like, yeah, that would sound like it would go into a Kirby song.
I like that, yeah. What else like to you is like special about like the production side of like that project?
So for me, that was like really like one of the first projects. I actually was like reaching out to people on the production side and be like, hey, is there like anything I could improve on this to make X cut further or do something like that? Or is there any like cool techniques you can teach me to make a thicker bass? So like one of the people I hit up was Bluesky, which is the creator and like lead member of this band called Sleeping on Stardust, which is like a Cybgrind band, and he does a lot of mix and mastering for a lot of different DIY projects. So I basically was like hitting him up and asking like really dumb questions, and I'm very glad and thankful that he was able to like sort out how awful the questions were and like give me like really good insight onto like the production side of music that I never had before. So a lot of it was just like trial and error and then just asking for that feedback. So for this project specifically, that was like the very first time I was actively like and like openly trying to get feedback on it and like making notes and then getting them corrected as best as I could.
Gotcha. Yeah, because you're like entirely like self-taught like on all of this stuff, so it really has been a lot of like kind of just trial and error figuring it out. Is your background a lot more like how long have you been playing music, like playing guitar, like all that? Because I know that you play guitar, do covers on like YouTube and stuff like that as well. So
going back as far as I have been playing music was like 7th grade, and I decided to pick up the clarinets in school.
All right, yes.
So
very classic.
It's honestly an amazing instrument, and I wish I played it way more, but I just don't, and I want to. But I basically played clarinet all throughout school and like high school, and then I started picking up on side bands because I was a part of like a lot of religious organizations when I was younger. So it's just like, okay, I will pick up bass guitar and like play that for them because they need a bass player, and I know kind of how to play clarinet. So it's just like, let me slide up in there. So a lot of my early experiences with like learning music, learning about like how to organize like gigs, how to get people together and stuff like that was like really built around that like fundamental groundwork. And then as I got throughout high school, I kept on playing clarinet. I also picked up tuba for a year to play something different. And then I picked up guitar around the same time period. And I just really started like learning a bunch of different things, like music theory through YouTube.
Okay, sure.
So a lot of my like background is a lot of like DIY slash like asking people random questions. Just because I didn't have that like very much formal background.
Yeah.
Necessarily, like none of the music teachers really taught like music theory that I went to for like clarinets. It was just really like, yeah, you play clarinet. Here's your class period, and then you kind of like leave. I was just like, okay, cool. But really, like the religious side of it, when I was younger, like really pushed me in that direction to playing live music with people. And then eventually I fell out of like being really religious or like religious altogether when I was like 17, 18. So I fell out of touch with like a lot of those different people, but that was like the initial start.
I feel like that's like a very unique story as far as getting into this type of music, because like for a lot of people, you know, you tend to have things like, oh, you know, the first time I heard Green Day, or the first time I heard, you know, this band, that band, the other thing. So I think it's really interesting that like the start of your musical journey was basically through like middle school, high school band class, and then like after that, you know, kind of getting into, was it like worship bands, or was it like what sort of stuff were you doing with like the church groups? Were you doing like stuff where you were playing at like youth group things, or was it like playing it with the worship band every Sunday? Like what was sort of like that sort of deal?
So, back when I was like middle school, high school, I played like every Sunday for church on bass guitar and piano sometimes. Don't ask me to play piano now because I could not even attempt it. And then I also played at like youth groups occasionally, and then we would do like micro tours of going to like different summer camps and then playing like contemporary Christian music to them. And I traveled throughout like South Carolina, North Carolina, and I went up to Pennsylvania one time for this one camp. So kind of had a little bit of a touring experience through just playing summer camps for kids when it comes to music. And then like building that up into like DIY ethics and stuff was like really interesting crossbreed between the two worlds.
It's interesting too, because like actually playing in like the youth group band was probably my first introduction to playing in a like kind of rock band setting, because the leader of the youth group had a rock band back in the day, and like we kind of, everybody who was in that was into like rock music, and so we kind of did like rock like amped up kind of versions of like that sort of stuff. So it's really interesting hearing like another person who like that was a formative like part of becoming a musician. Interestingly, that was also how I got into like audio engineering too, was like literally just the church needed somebody to run sound on Sundays, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. I've always been into like technology and stuff like that, and so I started to learn it and realized that I really enjoyed it, you know.
That's also like how I got into like mixing kind of for like the first time, was like my church just needed a sound guy randomly for like a Sunday, so I just like popped up on the mixer board and like quickly learned like how to use the volume sliders, how to
just
EQ
figured it out
and stuff. And that was like super fascinating like then, and like still to me now as like a thing you can just like study, get really good at for like live audio engineering.
It's very interesting. I never realized that we had so many parallels like in that kind of like upbringing like that. That's really interesting. But I think it's also really funny to me that like you started out playing like the clarinet and like a lot more of like the classical kind of like instruments, and didn't really get into playing like the rock music as much until later, because again, that's usually what draws people into music, was their first time hearing like one of their favorite bands and like, I want to do that.
A lot of it was just like at the beginning, just like happenstance. Like I used to listen to like music in like middle school, like Nirvana, Green Day and stuff like that, like the traditional 90s alt bands. but like I wasn't really drawn to an instrument necessarily at first because of it. It just seemed like a fun thing to do without like the music part. And then I've like grown to massively appreciate the music part way more now than probably like playing it personally.
But it was almost like the culture was more what drew you in at that point, as opposed to like the music itself.
Yeah. And then soon
Interesting.
it became about like the culture over like the period of like playing music and just like growing up and like maturing and stuff like that. To like where I just made an entire project just built around like the community aspect of music and like the remix side of like the culture of music. So I feel like that's like a really cool like maturing of me throughout my like time as playing music.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I think that it's crazy that you've had such a journey, like so many different things to get to this point. Do you consider yourself a producer or like a musician first when it comes to like categorizing yourself within the scene, or even like what you try to focus on?
I try to focus on production because I feel like I am pretty decent at guitar now to the point where I can just kind of pick up things and just like go along with it. So like producer first, musician second. That's kind of how I view myself at this point.
Sure. What are some of the other like projects that you've just been involved in on more of like a production side of things that you're like really proud of that have come out in the last couple of years or the last year or whatever?
Generally, some of the production stuff, I just got a few cool opportunities that I can't talk about necessarily right now. That I
the best kind of content for a podcast. I can't talk about this, but cool things are coming. I swear.
I swear, some of the best stuff I've ever worked on is coming out. It's just it'll take a second. But in terms of other things, I worked with Sleeping on Stardust on their newest record, Navigator. On like instrumentation. I produced an entire electronic breakcore type of remix of one of the tracks on the record, and I also did some vocals. And I just thought, like, on the production side, it was just crazy of how much freedom or like control I was just given to like do something. I was like, oh, sweet. And then I've also worked with various like Cybgrind bands like 3000 Centipedes, Bottom Surgery, Vulgar, Vulgar. Just as like examples of like different bands or artists I've like worked with in the past. Like the Bottom Surgery song that I forgot the name of because it's super long and involves like Rainbow Road and dying on it or something. And that was like the first time I ever hit up someone. I was like, hey, may I make a beat for you? Because like I really like your music and I really just want to make something cool for you and just like have that project exist. So that was like a really cool instance of just like throwing something at someone and then them also liking it. And I thought that was also just like an insane experience.
That's another thing that I think is really interesting that I've learned a lot doing the podcast specifically, but it seems like you have a lot of experience with as well. That's very interesting about this community is kind of realizing that everybody just does this for the love of the game and very few people have like an ego about it. So like it's very easy to collaborate with the people that you really like their stuff. If you literally just reach out, say, hey, I like what you're doing. Like, would you want to do, you know, XYZ? I think it's really interesting because like a lot of people will kind of like put their favorite artists up on a pedestal. Like there's so much far above me, like, you know, like I couldn't, you know, whatever. And I think that it's a very interesting thing that we all kind of have to learn in our own way that like everybody's just a person. You know what I mean?
The transition of going from like not engaging with like DIY and just being like a passive observer to like, oh, I can actually just like message these like really cool people doing these really cool things I really admire and like potentially like do a project with them is just insane to me. And like that still is insane, but that's like been a really big thing I've been learning. It's just like everyone is human and everyone is just trying to make like the best art that they can and like just find the passion and like the love for the music, and I really like respect and love that about the community.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think that like there is like a transition that almost has to happen there. Like you kind of like the first couple times you're like, oh, I don't know if I should reach out, and then you get to the point where it's just like, hey, so this is an idea that I had. Are you into it? Like you kind of like learn to drop the bullshit a little bit, which I think is interesting too.
Instead of like putting like a long like flowery sentences and stuff, it's just like, here is blunt, like this is like the first thing, but it's also like this is the reason why I think you'll be amazing at this, because like I listen to your music and stuff like that, and it like kind of rolls backwards, kind of. At least that's how I've been pitching different ideas to people. Because at first I'll like hit up people and be like, hey, may you be willing to like do XYZ, and this is the reason why I think like you would be perfect for this, is because you made this song and I really like that, so I think you would be like amazing at it, or something like that.
Yeah. So like kind of moving forward, obviously you just released your album, the remix album, back in August, and you have some stuff that you can't really talk about right now, but is there anything like on the horizon that you're really excited about for like 2025 that people can get excited about?
There are two separate projects I'm currently working on that I can fully like talk about because they're my own projects. The first one is like, I'm trying to make a post-hardcore / like Cybgrind project, just because like how much I love Cybgrind and that scene. So I really want to like just make music using that genre and like those stylistic flarings and stuff like that. And I am like 7 songs deep into making that. And it is some of the funnest stuff I've made, because it is just like going off the wall, like absolutely like hardcore chugs and everything included.
Nice.
But it also has like some weird electronic breakcore-esque elements in it to really like tie it all together. And then the second one is like a real Dan Macy like LP that I'm only like 1.2 songs written.
Okay. So is that kind of leaning more into like kind of the emo type stuff, or is that, because I know that you also have a very deep love of like pop music as well, so like is that kind of leaning more in that direction?
I'm finding myself writing in this weird gray zone between like emo and pop. So it's like emo pop electronica type of flarings. Like I don't want to say like 21 Pilots or anything like that. It's like a comparison to it, but it's kind of blurring on that line between like, yeah, you could consider this emo, but you could also consider this like another genre very easily.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where most of it has gone to so far for that project.
That's pretty sick. I also like just kind of thought about this because I was, bringing up the fact that you are really into like Cybgrind and that you have this kind of like post-hardcore project as well. But I was just thinking about the fact that like a lot of your musical upbringing was not that at all. So like what was it that got you interested in like the heavy shit?
Probably when I started getting to like My Chemical Romance in like 7th, 8th grade, and then started going backwards from there. But then I kind of like regressed, got into like Midwest emo with like bands like Modern Baseball, if you want to consider the Midwest emo, quote unquote. If you're like a purist and you want to fight me on that. Mom Jeans.
I'm not involved in that argument either way. I do not care, but
someone somewhere cares very deeply. But got into those bands, and then probably in the past year or two, I've gotten more into like actual hardcore or like post-hardcore bands. Like early on, I really liked Citizen and like Title Fight in high school, and like bands adjacent to that type of sound. And then as I got older, the more like metalcore sounding bands I've started listening to, but a lot of those bands are like DIY instead of like the mainstream like radio bands, quote unquote. like
Yeah,
Ghosts.
because that was what got me into like heavy music. Was like I already kind of liked, you know, the heavier stuff. Like anytime something like Metallica or Black Sabbath or like anything like that would come on the radio, I was all about it. But it was like in middle school, my friends showed me like kind of that explosion in the late 2010s of like the metalcore of like of Mice and Men or like Asking Alexandria, like that type of shit was what got me into it. So it's really interesting seeing what everybody's first foray into like kind of the screamy heavy shit is, because like there's definitely like a bridge there. You know what I like? People can enjoy heavy music, but like that's usually like the last thing before you're like all in on it. Is you have to get in, you have to find your band that's the gateway band into you liking like the harsh vocals and the screaming and like that kind of shit.
I will say, thinking back on it, Pierce the Veil was actually like the first band I listened to that actually had like screamo elements in it. So I guess in that way, that would have been like my gateway into like going, yeah, I think more people should scream in music.
Hell yeah. Is there anything else specifically that you want to touch on between like kind of your background in music, any new projects or projects upcoming that that you want to talk about before we kind of get into like the next part of the episode a little bit more?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of like if there's anything like really crazy. Just like one piece of advice: if you want to make something, just make it. That is like
100%.
Like I would have never gotten into like this Discord call if one day I didn't just go, I'm just gonna make something and see how it happens, and you learn how to do it as you're going along. So like just don't be afraid of that first step, because a lot of the times throughout this past year, as I have been taking like Dan Macy more seriously or like other random adventures, was just like taking that first step and just like committing to it. Like me playing bass guitar way back in the day, even because like I didn't know how to play bass guitar, but I was just still like, yeah, I'm just going to do this.
I can figure it out.
Yeah. So that's my biggest piece of advice as like how I've grown more as an artist, and what I feel like I could potentially offer like a lot of people who are maybe like watching this video / podcast. It's just like, take that first step, just do it. Just commit to it.
100%. And that's one of the things that I love about the DIY community, on top of like how community oriented it is and everybody is just like into, you know, collaborating and all that. But it seems like everybody who's involved is the type of person to have an idea and then like actually follow through with it. Because everybody, I feel like, has that story or a similar story of like, I wanted to be in a band in middle school or high school. And so I asked my friends who were also into the same type of music as I was, and they were like, yeah. And then you were the only person who like ever took it seriously, like tried to practice your parts or anything. And everybody who's kind of like in the DIY community now, in their own ways, you know, whether it's like, you know, making visual art, making remixes, putting out things, like there's been so many like new tape labels and stuff like that too that have come out in like the last couple of years. Everybody is kind of the type of person to have an idea and like commit to the bit in a way. And I think that is one of my favorite like aspects of this.
Yeah, like the follow through is really amazing in the scene, because like I feel like for most people the follow through to an idea of getting made is kind of like shaky, but then it's like you go into like DIY circles, it's like if you have an idea, you're going to get it done. It might take you forever, but it's like it is going to be like a very amazing like payoff of just being like, I did this.
Yeah, and I mean, it oftentimes there's, you know, there'll be things that get in the way as far as like, you know, money to finance things or whatever. But I think that there's like also something kind of charming about like everybody just doing this in spite of it, being like, well, I don't have the best stuff, but I'm gonna do with it what I can, instead of like, you know, so many people also get hung up on the like, ooh, I need this type of gear in order to do whatever. And I think that you know, also just taking the plunge with what you have, and then once you kind of figure out how to use that to the best of your ability, leveling up too is another aspect of that.
Like the way I first started producing music was just like on my phone. Like I didn't have a computer that could even like barely run Minecraft at the time. It was just like barely able to run Google Docs. So I just like downloaded FL Mobile a cracked version even of that, which is like $15 or something. And I remember just like getting really attached to just learning production even in this like pseudo environment. Like I could still make the songs that I was thinking of even if I didn't have the necessary gear or necessary equipment to make it as best as I could. It was just like getting that idea on paper and seeing like I could do that, which then kept on giving me the motivation to be like, maybe I want to spend like more money on a good computer later on, like save up. But until then, I still have this way to make music. And like same thing with like my first guitar. It was like this $50 pawn shop guitar that they're just basically trying to give away by some like knockoff brand. And I sat down and learned on that guitar. Thankfully, it was set up decently enough so I could learn with it. But it's just like...
That's always such a terrible thing. Like people trying to learn on a guitar and not knowing that it's like set up terribly. And so you're literally like, you don't know what you're doing on top of actively fighting with the instrument because it doesn't play right. Like that's the worst shit.
Or like it doesn't stay in tune and you're like, why do I have to keep tuning it and stuff? And it's because like
why
this
do
one
I sound
weird
terrible?
thing.
Why is it always out of tune? And it's just because like the tuning pegs suck or whatever.
Yeah. But like that's honestly like gear kind of matters sort of, but like in the getting that idea out and like following through to seeing like some type of like end goal through like any resources that you have is like the biggest like DIY like stamp of like yes, just do it type of thing.
100%. All right, so I think that that's probably a good spot to like to end this first section, the first segment of the podcast on some advice for people who are looking into getting into the scene a little bit. So the next part of the episode, we're gonna go back and forth, share some new music, some music that people might not know, some fresh finds, if you will. So I'm gonna have the first one. We're gonna go back and forth, which is gonna give you the closer. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
All right, lovely. So I think this first one is going to be right up your alley. I'm guessing you've probably already heard it, if I'm being honest. But it's the title track from Splitjaw, who are a hardcore band from Chicago, and this is the song Dread's Comforting Embrace, which is the title track off of their brand new EP that they released on November 1st.
I've been set up for failure, a walking disaster, a breaking such pleasure, a plastic in love. I can't trust my friends and I can't trust the doctors. All I can trust is this feeling of dread. Like tell me again, say I'm just being anxious. I've done nothing wrong, there's a voice on my head. I'm not superstitious, but this can't be happening. Since most times point to someone wanting me dead.
Yeah.
Dude, first off, this whole EP is just absolutely incredible if you're into this kind of like metallic hardcore type of shit.
Oh,
like
100%.
it sounds incredible. The riffage is amazing. And like the lyrics are very provocative too, which I really like.
I really like my like favorite, almost like guilty pleasure of like hardcore music, even though it's not like a guilty pleasure. It's just like when bands just go in that halftime groove, like especially towards the end right there. Like, that just makes my brain just like go, Like, I really love that.
Like, the groove is incredible. The other thing that I absolutely love, like, kind of production-wise about this, is that it's also, like, it kind of sounds modern and old school at the same time. Like, it kind of walks that line, especially, like, with the guitar tones and stuff like that. Like, they're that very kind of, like, mid-rangey type of, like, thing, because, you know, old school hardcore, you really didn't have actually a lot of bass in it because you were like, you know, recording it on like really cheap shit a lot of the time. And so like it kind of has that lo-fi thing, and the guitars kind of have that, but also like the bass still is like deep, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, like the bass is still like pumping through it, but like the top of it, or like the tone of like the guitar sound like is something from like kind of like a classic 90s type of sound at the same time.
Exactly, yeah. And like that bass tone is just incredible. It's so crunchy. That's something that I've been getting really into a lot with like production, is you produce the bass twice essentially, like parallel processing it, so that you've got one that just handles like the low end so that it sounds really like thick, but then also doing another one where you kind of roll the low end off a little bit, and it's got like that really like distorted like major like articulation type of sound. That kind of sounds like what they're doing there, and I just absolutely love it.
I think I accidentally do that with a frequency splitter, because I basically like focus in on the bass guitar on the lows and then like go in afterwards and then split to a separate channel with the highs to like mid-range to like add that like maybe aggressive little like pump to it slightly.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's like a slightly different process, but like the exact same result basically. You're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I love when like artists like kind of make these like production decisions that really make the track pop that you might not necessarily like stereotypically think would be with that genre, such as like using like frequency splitters on like hardcore mixes, which is something that a lot of electronic producers will do, and it's interesting to see like how that's spreading into like other songs, for example this one, and I really love that.
I think it's also interesting, like when you look at production stuff, a lot of that is like just different ways of achieving the same thing, essentially. Like electronic producers might do it one way because it's like this is kind of more of, you know, how, you know, producers used to do it, like kind of making like dubstep and like, you know, whatever. Or like maybe even it was just like that was what used to be the way to do it before like technology, you know, gave us other ways to do it. But I think it's really interesting seeing how people have different like methodologies to achieve basically the same thing. On top of that, the lyrics of this song are absolutely incredible. You can find them on Bandcamp. It doesn't look like they're anywhere else. But one of the lines that I specifically like stood out to me is because as far as I understand, Maud, who is their lead vocalist, is a trans woman, and this song is very clearly, if you read the lyrics, very clearly about like the fight for trans rights and things like that. And this, I guess it's the sections of this song aren't really as clearly defined as like a traditional pop song, but like the end of this kind of like first chorus, I guess you might want to call it, because it's like a repeated part, is you want justice and they just want peace. Basically like talking about how like all that you want is to just be treated like a fucking person, and like everybody else is like, shut up, just be happy that you're still alive. And like I think that this is such a important topic, especially right now in like the political landscape that we are about to enter, that we've been living in, but especially like right now. I think that going through these lyrics and really like reading this from the perspective of a person who has been dealing with it, as opposed to me, just like a regular white dude, trying to explain it. I don't have the words to say any of this, but if you just like read the lyrics of this, listen to the aggression of it, you will get the point that this is trying to make.
First, I really love Mauld's music, like independent from Splitjaw. Like it's this very nice, like electronic pop-esque like type of sound, and I really love like her independent work. But like on this, it really comes out with like that aggression, and I feel like it helps with the song, but also helps like get these like very hard topics through, and like it matches like the feeling of it, because it's like this song is just like in your face, trying to get like aggressive into it. And I feel like that is kind of the energy as well, like the lyrics are backing when it comes to the oppressive forces of like societal connotations on people, and like the different discriminations that they may face based off their race, sex, gender, necessity, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just like, I think that really like encaptures like both together really well on this.
Absolutely. This whole EP is incredible. This is the title track. It's only been out for like a couple weeks at this point, but absolutely just killer stuff right out the gate. I cannot wait to see where this band goes.
Also, they were I vividly remember this. They were like shared by New Metal Agenda, like New Metal Moments.
Yeah.
And that was super cool.
No, that was awesome as well. Just like getting, because I don't actually know what is kind of like the background on that account. Like, is it like kind of more of a blog type of thing? Because I've kind of like seen them around, but I don't actually know. Like, is it just a Twitter account? Like, I don't actually know.
So it started off as like, I understand, as like a blog covering new metal moments, and then it switched up onto Twitter, where they just started posting like clips of bands doing like really cool things like Slipknot, and then they also post like DIY bands as well. And I think like they're like one of the best to balance like showing like popular bands while like keeping that like DIY band still. And like it is like a very beautiful blend on like their Twitter. But they also have like full-blown articles you could read by various writers.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even realize that. So yeah, I kind of want to go a little bit deeper on that sometime. I feel like I just see them pop up on occasion. Like I've never like dug into it at all.
I want to say they're run by Lampco, which is another organization, but I don't remember.
Okay. So what do we have up next? What's going to be your first choice? First pick?
Let me start off with something that is more adjacent to normal sounding music, quote unquote. And it will be Sleeping on Stardust, the person who I asked for mixing and like mastering advice in the past. I really love his music. This is a kind of like a solo act that features a lot of artists while he is making it. So he'll have a track and then he'll just send it to someone to like write lyrics for it. Or do more stuff in that nature.
Okay.
So this is off of his record from 2023, Going Memus. One day I will learn how to speak English. But this song is called Pokemon Are Stored in the Balls 2.0. And it is the like what got me really heavily into Cybgrind.
Oh, interesting. So it was kind of your gateway.
Yeah, I wrote an article for Lonely Ghosts Records for this record just because of like how much it made the entire scene of Cybgrind make sense to me, and like how much the sound resonated with me after I listened to this record. So that is like, I highly recommend checking this album out with all the other wonderful artists that we'll be playing today.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Make sure it doesn't like loop on forever.
Yeah. I like that a lot. It's definitely more approachable than like a lot of other stuff that I've heard from like the kind of cybergrind genre. It's always funny talking about like accessibility in terms of like extreme metal type of music, just because it's like, oh, well, that's just not straight noise, I guess. So like people might be more into it. But like I'm getting a lot of, especially in the vocals, a lot of like old school death metal kind of influence, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I believe like the person behind this project like really loves like 80s rock and like 70s rock, and like really loves like that more traditional like metalcore sound of like early Metallica and like thrash metal. So it's like interesting to see kind of that old school type of like writing and like sounds popping up in this like completely new environment of like electronics are going off, and it's blending so many different like genres and sounds together and still being like cohesive as like a project. It, like just blew my mind.
Yeah, because like while the vocals kind of remind me of like older death metal, like the rhythms, especially like the da 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 da, like those kind of like really aggressive like just chug breaks basically remind me a lot of like kind of the crabcore era of like metalcore a lot more too, and also with the guitar tone reminds me a lot of that too. So I think it's really interesting how it's kind of like blending these different eras, because it's definitely not like, because you think mixing like metalcore with like death metal you would get like deathcore type shit, but this doesn't sound like deathcore at all, which I think is really interesting. Anybody who doesn't know metal subgenres is just going to be hearing gibberish from this point on. It's
just like metal. If persons scream on guitar, there is no other such thing as any other genre. But it's been really interesting just like to get into like Cybgrind, which kind of is like a loose genre name for like this type of music that kind of involves that like crabcore type of sound from like the MySpace era of like hardcore music and the era of like Attack on Attack and different bands in that era, and still like modernizing it in these like very interesting ways, playing with like modern metalcore as well. And I think that's like one of the biggest appeals to the genre, but also because like just how open and varied you can get into the genre now, because people less so focus on like the grind aspect of cybergrind and kind of focus way more on the cyber part, which is like the next track I have eventually, which kind of like showcases that more like cyber part, loose goose of the genre. But it's like I feel like the song kind of like purposely represents like cybergrind at like a base core level of just like this mixing pot of all these like beautiful or like harsh sounds coming together.
Yeah, for sure. And were some of those like kind of Game Boy type sounds, were a couple of those like actually ripped from the Pokemon? Like I heard the one thing that I think was it sounded like when your Pokemon's like low on health or something like that, I think is what it sounded like. I haven't played a Pokemon game in so long, but
I don't think I've played one in like 5 years, so I feel you there.
Yeah.
I believe, for non-legal reasons, of course, that it definitely isn't Nintendo-related IP. But if I had to assume, I would say it probably could be.
I'm also curious because I don't know how much you know about like the background of like the making of this or anything, because you said that you have like, you know, talked to them a bit and things like that. Do you know if they use like a circuit bent Game Boy? Because I know that like Exciting Excellent uses an actual hardware Game Boy to make a lot of their sounds. Do you know if they're doing that for this, or if it's like an emulator or anything?
I want to say it is an emulator in Reaper.
Okay.
I am not too sure about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did have this set up in his room at all. I'd like if he said he does or doesn't. It would kind of blow my mind if he like doesn't have one, just because of like how accurate these sounds are to like the original hardware.
I think that that's something that I find really interesting is the fact that people have found ways to just access the MIDI of like all of these old game consoles and just use them in that way to make their own music. I think it's really cool.
My cat keeps on like borderline jumping on my keyboard like every like few minutes, so I'm like words plus cat.
Please
Okay.
do not mess with the recording at all. I don't want to lose the footage.
Kitty cat, please.
All right, so my next tune is going to be from a band called A Tiger Made of Lightning, which first off is an incredible band name. They are a newer kind of like post-hardcore type of band that have been releasing a couple of singles over the last few months. I think they're gearing up for either an EP or an album, but I need to look into that a little bit more. But anyway, they are from Columbus, Ohio, and this is their most recent single that was released on November 1st. It's called Better Parts of Broken Things.
Scatter the ashes alone. From this place I can never go home. Step out into the unknown and discover a new way to go. I walk the path with horizons as wide as the sky. I saw my whole life that this all could be mine. Soon I found out it was right from the start. A mountain of dead and a hole in my heart. Where do I go from here? Scatter the ashes alone. From this place I can never go home. Step out into the unknown and discover a new way to go. You cut me down for the last time, and I rebuilt myself. You cut me down for the last time, and I rebuilt myself. To be a beacon to look through in times of despair. A person to count on is someone who cares. Despite the blankness and all its persistence, I'm reaching for joy as an act of resistance. Better parts of broken things. Better parts of broken things. Scatter the ashes alone. From this place I can never go home. Step out into the unknown and discover a new way to go. Better parts of broken things. Better parts of broken things.
Oh man.
really
Again,
love
kind of
that.
that like throwback, like almost like MySpace era, like post-hardcore sound. But like I just absolutely love all of the singles that they have dropped leading up to whatever this next project is going to be. All been killer.
Like, I would love to see that song live, just like be a part of the crowd killing, because like I feel like
It
that
would-
would go so hard.
The panic chords, you're just going to be like, oh my God, I'm about to die.
When it's like the wall of death, but it's actually like you're probably going to die in the middle of that pit.
I just saw a really interesting lineup that they're going to be playing with. Who was it? They're going to be playing in early December with Casper Fight Scene and Cliff Diver.
Oh, that's crazy.
Which is really kind of a crazy lineup because they're a lot more like kind of like hard rock, emo kind of tinge stuff. So I think that this is like, especially for that show, going to be like a really crazy like change of pace. But all of their stuff that I've been hearing so far is crazy.
I think like a sick lineup, slash like kind of like the band closest to like kind of this sound would be like Excuse Me, Who Are You on like Double Bind, where it's like emo hardcore type of sound. And like this is going way more into like hardcore and like kind of abandoning a lot of like the emo like traditional sounds that you will get. And it's just like it's really just like pushing like forward in that sense, I guess. Especially for like that like era of like cliff divers and going in like that scene is like really cool.
Well, and that's again the thing that I kind of like about DIY is there is kind of this like crossbreeding of like you go to see a bill and you will get all sorts of different styles of music, you know, whether it's like a lot heavier stuff or like a bit lighter stuff or whatever. That's something that I've always kind of really loved about like the culture of DIY shows, is that there's kind of going to be something for anybody who's into any kind of like alternative music generally.
Well, went to recently just go see Combat play, and like they had this like one like a Scrams band play, but then they had this like hardcore electronic, I don't know, but it was like super like experimental and cool. And like
sick.
They were like using like voice manipulation software and stuff like in real time, while like they were playing drums with like one hand, and I was like, that is such a crazy lineup to have before Combat. But it was super fascinating. I really loved it.
Yeah, the way that some people like really experiment, and like especially when you experiment with music in like in those types of ways, and like you probably relate to this a lot too. I know that you don't really play live shows as Dan Macy. But like you really kind of have to just find places where you can kind of like slip in a little bit, because you're not going to find other people making like the exact same type of stuff. And so I think it's interesting, like kind of finding ways that you can like bridge that gap to be able to like play with these different types of bands and like actually get on bills.
And also leads to like even like more music being like even more diverse, because you're listening to like such a diverse range at like shows, and you're like supporting like such a diverse range of sounds. So like in that sense, it's like really cool to see like all these different sounds like crossbreeding would be like the best way
for sure.
to also like it kind of explain that as well.
I just realized looking at their page on Tidal is that this band, A Tiger Made of Lightning, has been releasing music since 2020. I don't know why, but maybe it's just because I just discovered them when like their newer stuff started coming out. But I thought that they were like way newer. I'm really looking forward to sometime in the next couple days going through and like checking out some of their older stuff, because this is just absolutely killer and I would love to have more of it. They have 2 full-length albums from 2022 and 2023. So they might be doing an album a year at this pace, which is pretty incredible for DIY bands.
I really love when bands like come up super quickly, but they've been like doing like playing music and like being a band for like 5 or 6 years, and then like randomly they'll just like have something like go up and like pop off. It's really cool just to see like bands coming up that way. Like I think about like Harrison Gordon, for example, because like he's been at it for forever, and he just like this past year just like blew up off of like different content on the internet. I just think that's like super cool to see when like bands you've been following just has these like crazy explosions.
You finally see that tipping point. Like Saturdays at Your Place are a very similar band in that way as well, where like they had been making music for like a number of years, and then the Always Cloudy EP came out and like changed everything for them.
Yeah, like they just got done with like a headlining tour and stuff, and like that's super cool to see, just like kind of slowly building up to this like one moment where they just kind of like all like explode at one another, and it's super cool.
Yeah, and I think that it's really fun being able to follow bands through that too, and like see the reaction to like, oh shit, like people care about us now, like like what is going on?
I think like the biggest example, at least for me, is like I've been following Red Sun for like over a year now, and seeing like all the cool things they've been doing, and it's cool to see they just got signed to like Wax Bodega. They have a split coming out on Wax Bodega, and it's like that's just like super amazing to see.
They didn't even have, I think that they released their first song on streaming this time last year, like a year ago. It's like, been a crazy, crazy year for them.
They've just exploded, and I feel like it's really cool just being like both a fan of the genre of music and like also like being an artist, because like it's just super cool to just be a fan of these like wonderful musicians and like them getting like these crazy opportunities and just being like, oh cool, wow, I can't believe that this person did like this crazy like incredible thing with like a certain label or like a certain venue or something like that. Like to me, that's just like one of the best feelings ever.
Yeah, it's just even like the secondhand like excitement from that. Like it's not happening to you, but you're like you've been watching them for so long. It's like I'm proud of what they've accomplished, basically.
Yeah, same thing with me with like Riley, because I've been listening to him for like ever too, and it's like crazy to see like where they have come with like their newest record and just like all the cool places they played at.
The tours and like getting a couple different pressings on Counterintuitive Records as well. Yeah, they've also been popping off this year. That's honestly the new Riley album is probably one of my favorite albums of the year so far.
Honestly, that's in my like top 5 for this year. I always just say like it's top 5 no matter what, because I'm like I don't want to choose a favorite. So here's like 5 albums that are like I love, and that's how I kind of play with the top of the albums every year.
Totally fair. So what do we have up next?
So, as I was saying previously, before we just listened to the great song by A Tiger Made of Lightning, we're going to go into the cyber part of Cybgrind. So this is going to be like your more aggressive beats / noise kind of sound. And this is going to be by a artist called Bottom Surgery and Skeleton Meet Fantasy Library on the album Skeleton Surgery 3. The song is called Bottom, I'm not sure if I can say this word, but Bottom Horsefair. That's how I will say that. I'm not sure if YouTube hates certain words, but hopefully they do not. This person was originally from Arizona, I believe, Nevada. No, wait. Yeah, Nevada. And they are just like an amazing artist. Plus Skeleton Meet Fantasy Library, also another amazing artist that I recommend checking out. Hopefully this works without some random thing happening.
All right, let's go.
House with this beat, bitch. Hold on a sec. Snip, snip, watch her spit off of my eyelids. Snip, snip, watch the bottle wanna try quick. Snip, snip, eat her motherfucking foot.
That was insane.
This is the only music I choose to work out to ever. It is just like, it's full of energy, and I just like love it. It is just like over the top.
I mean, honestly, my favorite thing about this is the fact that I have my webcam on. I can see my reaction to this. The fact that like I couldn't do anything but just like kind of laugh at how ridiculously insane this is. Like words are funny, but this is almost like post-ironic dubstep, if that makes sense.
Oh,
It's
I
like,
get you.
It's like, to me, like I hear a lot of things that you would get in like, you know, a Skrillex song or something like that, but like it's just cranked up to like, you're not even at 11 anymore, you're at 13, you know, and like it's very interesting the way that you take all of this just fucking aggressive shit, but like it's still cohesive in a way. I have no idea how the hell they do it.
I've been trying to recreate a Bottom Surgery beat for like the past month, and I still can't do it. Like, it is very incredible the way that she makes her music, because it's just like, I can't explain it, and I don't know how anyone could, but it's just like, it is so powerful. and still like keeping that like pop tendency in it, where it's like that sweet beat on the background, where it's like you have this beat on top of this noise and it's going full throttle and it sounds so amazing to me.
It also like kind of reminds me, like specifically the bass, just the like that type of like bass that they have in it. This feels like the deep fried memes of music, if that makes sense. Like I don't know how else to explain it. Like I literally have to pull on like meme references as ways to like explain this, because like musically it's so different from like anything that I'm like really familiar with.
Like I feel like a lot of like the electronic side of like Cybgrind is just like trying to go as far away from like traditional music and like trying to keep it still sounding cohesive. And I think like there are so many amazing artists right now, like Tracy Breaks and I'm Letting Unforeseen Forces Take the Wheel, or as just like examples of bands that are just like making these insane like soundscapes and like trying to just push the limit as far as they can go while still keeping it like listenable per se. So like your average person who maybe is not used to like harsh noises in music.
Like I think it's really interesting how people try to take like the most extreme sounds that you could possibly imagine and still try and keep some semblance of musicality in it, because like it really is a valiant effort to be doing those sorts of things and like trying to really just find where the boundary is. Not necessarily like push the boundary, but figure out like how far can I take this before it kind of stops being able to be perceived as music, which I think is it's something that I've seen in a couple of other podcasts that I find very interesting, is the idea of how do you define music, right? Like I think something that I saw that I thought was very interesting was somebody said that music is anything that can be experienced as such. So like if you go into something with the intent of experiencing it as music, then it can be. But if you were to just like hear this, without that preparation, you might be like, oh, this sounds like, maybe not.
I've kind of always like, I loved researching or like looking into like what makes music and kind of seeing like the different deviations that people have on like what they would like classify as music. To me, I just see like any series of like loosely organized sounds is like music, and it's just seeing where people will take that concept, such as like using just like raw noise, or like taking a fan, plugging it through effects such as like Noise Musicians, where it's like, to me, I personally wouldn't like want to listen to that type of music. However, like there is still like that organization, and there's still this like story that can be told through like more extreme stylistic choices, such as like just distortion looping in on itself. And I think that is like very fascinating, because like I feel like music can be both about the sound and also like the story behind what you're doing with the sound, and it's just like those two parts blending together. And it's like really hard if you're not prepped on like the context of like what you're listening to like understand it. So I completely agree with what you were saying on when you're listening to like a more harsh noise album or just like a noise album, you have to be prepped with like maybe a story or like the context that what you're listening to is like trying to convey like a certain feeling or like a certain provoke like sensation in you. And I think that's really cool as well.
That's also kind of like where album art and things like that get to be very important, because that's like in more traditional music, you can kind of go, all right, here's our songs, here's an image that loosely kind of like captures the vibe, and you can call that your album art. But I feel like there's kind of like a thing, especially with like this type of stuff, where you have to be very deliberate in the artwork that goes along with it, that it like helps prep the people who are going to be listening to it for what it is that they're about to experience. All right, so I have the next pick, and now for something completely different. Up next is probably, if I had to guess, the most normal song that you're going to hear this episode. It's by a band called Wifey, and they are a power pop project from Brooklyn. This was a direct submission, so if you are watching the podcast, you make music, and you are interested in submitting anything to potentially be featured, send it to me at freshfindspod@gmail.com. But this is a band called Wifey. The song is called Marianne Leaves the Band, off of their new EP, Just a Tease, which was released back in September.
Mostly men in the marching band, and not a one girl's half as cute as Marianne at her music stand. My God, that girl knew how to handle a flute. Told her my name at the football game, and once again when we played the state fair. But ever since she met Johnny K, well, her priorities have been elsewhere. Marianne finds herself a man, and then the band starts falling apart. Marianne finds herself a man, and then the band starts falling apart. Now here she is, skipping practices. The kids in Woodwind are licking their wounds. I sit alone with my saxophone, but Mr. S won't let me play the blues. The music school don't feel as cool. The other girls are relieved, but since you quit, we play like shit. I'm jumping ship for the chess team. Marianne finds herself a man, and then the band starts falling apart. Marianne finds herself a man, and then the band starts falling apart. When Marianne leaves the band, when Marianne leaves the band. Oh, Marianne, I beg of thee, I'm pining for you as we plod through Yankee Doodle Dandy. This Becky girl can't play her parts as skillfully as you. Her breath control is spotty, and I heard that she eats glue. Sure, Johnny's got a car, and his sleeve tattoos are cool, but don't you think it's kinda weird he hangs around the high school? He's 32 years old, and he still lives with his mom. Pretty sure it's illegal for him to come to the prom. Marianne finds herself a man, and then the band starts falling apart. Marianne finds herself a man, and then the band starts falling apart. When Marianne leaves the band, 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 when Marianne leaves the band.
We've got ourselves a little bit of a palate cleanser there.
I really loved kind of the like charmy like campiness of like kind of that like Bowling for Soup era of like power pop. And
Yeah.
it's
Very like
it-
Fountains of Wayne kind of deal. Yeah.
it kept that like same like charm from that, and like kept on like expanding on it with like a really cool solo part in the middle of there, and like that entire like bridge section of like talking about this like random dude who's like, he should not be going to the prom. Like, that is red flag behavior. And I thought like the overall vibe of the track was like really just like fun slash like really like intriguing in that sense.
It's like the musical equivalent of like going back and watching like American Pie or something like that. Like it's got this very like campy kind of early 2000s like feel to it. I mean, even the lyrics again kind of has that just like high schooler movie type of like plot to it that I find very charming in that way. But yeah, like, and also musically, it is just very solid power pop too. I've been getting into a lot of power pop over the last year. Just like, I don't know, it's something that after having gone into like a lot more like heavy music over the last few years and stuff like that, like I've kind of gotten into just like a good short catchy tune is just like straight up my alley right now.
I think like kind of a band doing like a similar thing to this would be like Equipment's new single Tequila Red Bull,
Okay, sure.
where it's like that like power pop kind of middle Weezer-ish like discography sound, where it's just like it is just these like really fun sing-along songs, and I like really love just like, because it's really cool to like take music seriously but just have these like songs that are just like, oh yeah, this is like super fun. It's just also like really refreshing to hear and like to see bands doing.
Exactly. Like a few other ones that kind of like scratch that similar itch for me. Liquid Mike is like musically a bit different, but kind of has that similar thing of like, it's just very like straight up like pop rock type of stuff with extremely catchy hooks that you can sing along to after just a couple listens. Or even like probably my album of the year, it's a bit different, but like I kind of get a similar itch scratched by the new Townies album as well. There's a couple songs on that kind of like do a similar thing, but then they also go into like a bit of the heavier like kind of proggy and like emo type of stuff too, which I think is really cool. Probably why it's my album of the year and has been pretty much since it was released. But
like honestly, like overall, I just like really love like the aesthetic. I also have been like looking up the bands on my second monitor and just like looking at the album art, and it, like I really love how like everything like is tied together with this band Wifey, and just like how like well produced it sounds. I'm not sure like how they produced it or anything, but just like sounds really great.
So they were actually produced by Billy Manino, who is all over Twitter. You've probably seen him around before. Has done a ton of really cool stuff. So I would imagine that they went into the studio and laid all this down. And this was actually released on Mount Crushmore Records. Just absolutely killer stuff.
I need to look into them more with Mount Crushmore.
Yeah,
I don't think I've heard of that label yet, but I will after this though.
Yeah, I kind of want to look that up right now actually, because who else is like, is that just their own? No, that's not just their own label, but doesn't seem like there's any other bands that I'm specifically familiar with, but I will definitely check out some more stuff on that label for sure if it's anything like this.
Oh, 100%, especially like the power pop elements. Like I've really loved to like listen to more of this type of like sound and just like get more familiar with like power pop in general, honestly, because I feel like that is an area that I'm also like kind of unfamiliar with a lot of, other than like your very like popular bands from like the early 2000s. But like I really like love the sound, and I'm going to 100% listen to more.
Did you listen to the new Oso Oso record or any other of any of their other stuff?
I have listened to Osu Osu, and I do have a cover of Reindeer Games.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
Yeah, I have only, between me and you and whoever's watching this, I've only listened through 2 full Osu Osu records, and I need to change that. But I have listened to their newest record and the Yuhan mixtape. But those are the only
They're a band that I was also very like late to the party on. I didn't listen to them until their newest album came out. But I thought of that because they specifically mentioned in their email that it was like for fans of Fountains of Wayne and Oso Oso. But I mean, absolutely killer stuff. What do we have 100%. Up next?
So up next, since we are wanting to go into a more normal-ish like soundscape instead of this like very harsh stuff, I wanted to bring up a deep cut from King LJ. I believe that's how you pronounce their name. They're from Birmingham, Alabama. And they recently just released a record called Meanwhile, the 3.5 edition. And this song is called Vulnerability.
Sorry in advance if I let you.
That's really my safe space, though.
In advance if I let you. Sorry in advance if I let you.
And I hope you hit my heart.
Down.
always have. 3 a.m. again, back with pad and pen, right back. Not answering calls, been ignoring friends. I've been alone in this room, loneliness kicked in. I'm just trying not to spin, trying not to fuck. I'm here, trying to find myself, don't know where I went. I've been beginning again, hoping that it ends. Call me, missed to shoot my shot, but life blocked at the rim. Now I'm sitting here, shit is looking grim. I got a love-hate relationship with solitude. I can't tell if I'm healed or isolated from the truth. But however, I feel like give it all to you. And we'll look back one day and scrutinize the proof. Cause I ain't lied one time when talking to you. My safe space has always been inside this room. I would prefer to have a person to relate this to, but until her magical appearance, this what I have to do. Cause I'm not as strong as you think I am. I have moments, hope you understand. I'm not as strong as you think I am. I have moments that hit me truly, then I shake it off like Mariah grooving. Cause I realize gotta keep it moving. Ain't a fairy tale or a kid's movie or a Six Flags or Walt Disney. Might max out, but no goofy in me. The ideas big, nothing about me many. Every win proper, nothing about me Mickey. Boy, I'm with the shits like Donald bucking at the BET Awards. Never ducking any repercussions, but it's up and stuck. If you think the skill and the talent's luck, can't handcuff this lightning, bruh. Don't quote the grace, it might get you struck. Don't mention Drake, it might get you snuck. I been throwing flames, cause it's light work to the pipe burst and we close. Cause I be wanting me a best friend that's similar when doors closed. We can see the scene and dress up clean, make memories for sure. But I also wanna cap off some memories of some things that we can't disclose. But yeah, that's been over. Hate not having somebody to get closer, or bend over, a car trip with, or hit food spots and make jokes with, or hit the park with, or hit museums, or art shows, or television. You get the picture. Until then, I ride out this loneliness and get it out my system. Cause I'm not as strong as you think I am. I have moments, hope you understand. I'm not as strong as you think I am. Even still, nothing's changed. Stick to the plan.
Like, I really love, like, the smoothness of the beat and, like, their flows on top of it complement each other, like, super well. And I feel like that takes, like, a lot of talent, like, within the genre to, like, complement beats that well with that flow. And just, like, knowing, like, when to, like, flow in certain ways and, like, how to play with, like, stops and stuff like that. It's just, like, to me, I found, like, this track, specifically off this record, just be, like, very, like, impressive. And I just, like, really love, like, the song topic as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really like too is that it starts out with a much more like simple, kind of straightforward flow, and then like after it drops out, there's kind of like that little like turnaround with the sample, and then it goes into like the next section. That's when he starts getting into like the more technical, kind of like acrobatic types of flows. I think it's really cool to like start it out very like more simple, and then kind of like ramp up to that. And like at the end, it almost like sounds like he's rapping around the beat in a way. Like he's not hitting right on like the beat, where I almost lost like count of it for a second. But I think that it's really cool how some rappers have the ability to go around it but still work with the beat in that way, if that makes sense.
Like, it's kind of like the beat is like a living instrument that you're like playing off of and like playing on top of, where it's like you can like bounce off of it and then get right back onto it, and it sounds like so impressive to me.
Yeah, just I mean, I do not have nearly that type of control with my voice. So like just thinking about the fact of like being able to fit some of these rhyme schemes in the way that they do and things like that is very impressive. Like you mentioned as well, I also love that type of like old school sample based type of beat. That kind of like boom bap type of like sample based beat is really something that I love, that I kind of want more artists to bring back more, because it's kind of like an old school sound.
Yeah, like I feel like a lot of artists now, at least like in the genre of rap, kind of sample songs, but they kind of just it feels like it's not like necessarily like a creative decision with like their sampling, where I feel like on this it feels like a very organic way to like chop and like sample something in that like classical traditional hip hop from the 90s using like MPCs and like 808s and like bouncing off of that into like the modern day where you just only have computers and stuff. And to me, that early like bit of going, okay, I need to like splice this up here, tapping buttons constantly over and over again to like use the correct setting on the NPC and like that art form. I feel like it's like slightly lost, but there's a lot of artists that are using either old school material or using like new school technology in order to like recreate that like this. And like to me, that is really beautiful of like keeping that art alive in like that similar manner and like using these like old samples in like these very creative, unique new ways.
Yeah, well, and also like there's kind of a tendency with a lot of newer stuff to be sampling like more like pop and stuff like that, whereas this is an R&B type of sample, which I don't know what the sample is from. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a deep cut, but like I really love that sort of like just crate digging type of sound. Do you know if he produces his own beats?
I believe they do produce their beats as far as I'm aware. I haven't looked too much into them and like their process. But I want to say it is like mostly like DIY hip hop.
That's super cool. I really like the kind of rise of rappers and just artists in hip hop that kind of do like their own production as well as like the vocals, because there's something like that's a type of production that is very foreign to me, but it feels really strange to think about buying a beat and from a producer and then like finding you kind of have to write around it as opposed to like writing something and making a beat that goes with what you're writing. I don't know. That seems more intuitive to me than like just searching for different producers and beat makers and stuff like that, finding something that's a similar vibe. I feel like you would be more likely to have to settle in that situation as opposed to finding something that works exactly like how you want.
Like I feel like with like a lot of rap, it is, at least like in the modern day, it's a lot more like they're taking like the poetry that they've written down or they're freestyling and applying it to something rather than like taking something like a beat and like writing around it. Like typically like for us like instrumentalists, we think about the instrumentation and like how it goes with like the lyrics or like the singing, and we think about like that as in like a nuanced kind of way for us, because that's like what we value. Whereas like on the other side, like a lot of these people exclusively care about the words and like delivering the story or their message across through that, and that is like more valuable to this culture than like the necessarily like the instrumentals being like this specific way for this specific verse and that type of stuff. Or at least that's how I have like grown to like interpret it, at least.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I don't know. It's just a very different world. Like it almost feels like you're working backwards from like how my mind processes like the music making process, which is just interesting because I mean, you know, you just think about music in general and everybody thinks about it in a different way, and that's what makes it so interesting and why no two people make the exact same type of thing.
Yeah, like I really love music just because like there is like hundreds and hundreds of different like cultures and like subcultures to music like all across the world. And, like, there's hundreds of, like, thousands of millions of ways to, like, going about, like, creating music and, like, the different focal points on music. Like, whether or not you care more about the lyrics or, like, the beat or about, like, the instrumentation or solos and stuff like that. And to me, like, that really, like, brings, like, the music alive and, like, gives it, like, that extra, like, element of culture. Which I feel like is very important. Especially, like, on this record, talking about, like, the commercialization of, like, rap and hip-hop, and talking about how just because you are not making, like, commercially, like, successful music in this industry doesn't mean that it is, like, more or less valuable. And I also believe that it's, like, a major part of this record. And just, like, in music in general, I think that's, like, a really great lesson to kind of, like, take away from that.
100%. I love that a lot as well, because just because you're not generating capital doesn't mean that your music isn't worth anything to people in other ways. All right. So My next song is the one that I sent you earlier because as of recording this, it is currently not released, but it will be coming out next Friday, which I believe will be the past Friday by the time this album, or by the time this podcast comes out. Timelines are hard when you're thinking in the future like that. Anyway, by the time this is out, it will be out. This is a song off of the band Stop Drop Rewind's new self-titled album. They are what they call prog punk, which is basically pop punk if every single member of the band was really into like prog music growing up and just never wanted to play in 4/4. So this song is off of their new album. It is called The Bomb. The one that you have isn't actually called that because it was the working title. Anyway, let's listen to it.
Everybody has to die, but no one dies alone. Put my faith in humankind for all it got me. Snow was falling on the ground last time I saw my family. Same as the day that I was born, my mother told me. As a child I used to bleed when I fell down. Only cried when there was no one else around. Not a tear was shed before the mushroom called. I'll never be alone again. Once you reach a certain age, you see everything change, but nothing change at all. Still skipping round that stage. Does anything change? Nothing at all. You've reached the final phase. You've seen everything change, but nothing changed at all. Don't tell me nothing's changed at all. Tell me nothing's wrong when the sun goes down. Tell me nothing is wrong in the fearful dark as you shake apart the crowd. Tell me I'm fine. Tell me the end of life is so much different
That was crazy.
Dude, like where to start is the big thing, like I think that one of my favorite things is the fact that it hits so many different things. Like it's heavy in the chorus. There's that really, really funky like bridge/solo section, but it also gets like really kind of like dark and brooding in like a kind of calm way at the very beginning too. I think it's super cool, like how it takes you on this epic journey, basically.
Like, I really loved the prog, like, playing with time signatures in the bridge, where it was just like that, like, dun 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 type of sound.
Yeah.
Like, and it flowing on top of that solo was just, like, super crazy, too. And, like, blending it into, like, what you would say is, like, a traditional kind of, like, rock, like, Chevrolet, like, 3 Days of Grace type of sound to it. And it's just, like, that was, like, such a, like, a cool experience to, like, have those two worlds being blended together like super well, like super crisp.
Yeah. Another like small little thing that I really love is the end of the chorus, the do. The way that there's like, I think it's at least the guitar and the vocals, maybe the bass as well, all follow that run out of the chorus. And then it goes into like the next riff. I think is just such a fun little like unison moment. Like I think especially live, it'll be like a really cool part of the song.
I like really like also appreciate like the harmonic choices going up into like these really cool like da 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 type parts that feels like they're leading into the next part, and when it drops it feels like so satisfying too, where it just like it feels like it's going like out of time in these like triplet filling chords and like punches in together super well.
I would really love to see like more bands doing this kind of like proggy type shit. I feel like it's kind of an underserved market in a way in like the DIY scene, which is why I think that they're such a like unique and interesting band.
I'm not sure like too many bands in that like prog area that is specifically going for like hardcore-ish sound. Because like I feel like a lot of bands are going for that more like math rock type of sound. They're like playing with like a lot of these different concepts. So it's like getting like a lot of these like really cool like math rock bands to go more into that like proggy area, where I think that'd be like super interesting.
Yeah, because there are a lot of bands that play with like the time feel and like play with time signatures and like that type of stuff, but it's a lot more of a kind of like basic kind of pop rock song structure, whereas their music plays a lot more on the structure of the song in general. Like that, it's kind of that sort of thing. Like you think of Dream Theater, Tool, like all that kind of stuff, where you have very long songs with lots of different sections that have very different feels to them. And that's kind of the big thing that differentiates like the math rock from like the prog, basically, like in my mind, is like playing with structure a lot more.
Yeah, like a lot of the songwriting felt like interwoven within each other, and like it playing off of itself and like different motifs throughout was like super cool as well. And I also really love the fact they did include a chorus and like a very proggy song. Because like I feel like most of the prog / like long form rock songs that play with like a lot of different elements usually like don't have it, at least in my experience. But like this is also like a genre that I'm very unfamiliar with, other than like a few here and there.
See, that was something that was a lot more like up my alley growing up. Like before I got into like a lot of the heavier stuff, was I was very into like again like Dream Theater and Tool, and like that type of stuff was kind of like my introduction to like more complex music as far as structures and things like that go. But the way that you were talking about motifs reminds me of something that I think is very cool about this whole project. Is they were telling me that it's a loose concept album that is based on different interpretations of the apocalypse and what that might look like through like different lenses. They specifically said so it's got a wider scope down to like much more grounded things to almost like a mythical type of scale of like a mass apocalypse. And I think that that's going to be a very interesting way to like tie the record together.
I honestly can't wait to like hear way more of that project because I really love that song and like how it came together.
They released, I can't remember if it's an album or an EP right now. Let me look. A couple of years ago, it was an album. It was called Heavy Love. It's only 6 tracks, but it's a half hour long, and it is absolutely incredible. So if you're trying to get a taste of that before this new album drops, absolutely check that out. I was so into it when it came out a couple of years ago. And again, just very cool, like progressive type of stuff. But they also have like some fun tongue-in-cheek type of music too. Like they have a song called Space Force that is literally just like a 2.5 minute little like pop punk song that was kind of like a jab at the idea of making a U.S. Space Force. And it's like almost a jokey type of song. So it's really cool the range that they have. These guys are awesome.
Are they dropping the song that we just listened to as a single or like with the entire project? And
no,
whenever...
this is an album cut. So it'll be out when the album drops this Friday. As of recording.
Okay, I need to write that down so I can go listen to that when it drops.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible stuff. I like I said, I've been a fan of theirs for a couple of years now, so it's really cool getting some new music from them again.
Are we ready?
Yeah, what do we have up next?
So, as tradition, let's break all like norms. We have been listening to normal music too long already on this podcast, so we need to break it up, right? So here is a band called Dick Beats.
All right.
And this song is from their newer album called Dick Broke. And it is like this electronic breakcore / like skewed all over the place song that is just going everywhere. I think that is the best way I could physically even attempt to explain what's happening in this. So let's give the song gaysex.com.gov.edu a spin.
I'm as ready as I'm gonna be.
Kingdom fully recognizes the need for Israel to feel safe. It cannot be at the expense of the Palestinian people.
Ten out of 10 song.
I love how it's got the breakbeat type of thing that you can very much follow, but it's also like all these like little glitchy edits and things like that. Like this song is a series of moments, like each of these little like sound design elements basically that like break up the main beat, and I think that that's really interesting. One of the things that I always like think about with this is, this is only a 2-minute song, but I can't even imagine how long it would take to create this, because each one of those just like little glitch edit things, to get it to sound exactly right, I'm sure it takes forever.
Honestly, I used to try to make this type of music, and then I was just like, it takes a really long time to get everything the way I am envisioning it because of all of like the pitch bends and single effects that you just apply to like one area and that's it in the entire track. And you have to like automate that and like do a bunch of other things. So like me, I just find like this type of music super like technical and like impressive in that sense.
And that's the thing. I think that this is like kind of a thing where other music producers are going to see this and just be like, wow, this is insane. But I don't think that like somebody who's never done music production, I don't think could like even like appreciate quite as much how much goes into just those little things.
I really want to like pick people's brains about like this style of music and just see like what they think about it and like kind of like just use random terms to describe it, because it's just like it is absolutely insane, blending like so many different like elements, stopping, continuing, slowing down, pitch bends, all these like different effects. And like it's always interesting when you're not familiar with like this type of like breakcore or like these like cyber electronic grind tracks, kind of like what people are thinking while they're listening to it.
Yeah, it's again, because like as a producer and a musician and whatever, like I always kind of try and think about like, I wonder what was the spark for this project was, like, where the idea came from. And especially with this type of stuff, it's just such a different headspace.
Like one of the best places I found to like listen to this type of music is just like working out, because it's just like so intense and like over the top and going everywhere. Well, like while working out, it just like fills my brain in like such a great way to just like push through whatever I'm doing. So like in that sense, I feel like that would be like probably the best situation to listen to these like very intense, going everywhere type of tracks.
I feel like it would be too much to focus on for me. Like if I'm working out and like listening to stuff, I like stuff that is just like aggressively simple and heavy. Like I really like old school, just like knuckle dragger type of hardcore, like that kind of stuff when I'm working out, because it's like something that I can feel the aggression, but I don't have to like pay attention to the intricacies of it as much. But like, to each their own.
Like I want my brain to be absolute static while I'm working out, so I just like don't think about anything. Like I am being assaulted by like my ears, and I'm being like assaulted physically while working out, so I'm like, this is perfect music to listen to while doing that.
Oh, that's incredible. All right. So my final song of the evening now is probably another one of my favorite albums of the year. It's interesting because it wasn't one that like I immediately went, oh yeah, this is like a game changer. This is an album that is gonna be my album of the year when I listened to it the first time. But it was one that I just kept coming back to. And it's like, it was a slow burn to realize like, oh, this is probably one of my favorite projects of the year. But it's by a band called Oceanator. I discovered them a couple of years back because they opened for Pup on the Unraveling of Pup the Band, that tour, for at least part of it. I don't remember if they were on the entire tour or not. But anyway, this is from their new album, Everything is Love and Death. This song is called Get Out.
You never had my best
Again, more of that like kind of pop rock, power pop type of tendencies, which I've just been super into this year in general.
Yeah, like I really like love the guitar tone on that being like kind of like that earthy, gritty type of style and like pump while still keeping that like pop songwriting structure to it, kind of.
Yeah,
where
it's super catchy, but it's kind of like more of like a fuzz tone type of deal.
Yeah, it's like kind of like borderlining on like noise pop, but like not fully committing to the noise, but just keeping that like punk like grit to it while still like keeping the pop tones to it.
Exactly. And again, just like so catchy too. I mean, it's one of those types of songs that you can like hear the chorus one time and just sing along to it for the entire rest of the song. Just like the ooh, ooh, ooh. Like I just love those little like backing vocals and stuff like that too. They just make it such a fun song.
Yeah, like I really love how like pop took on like this band, like and like the size differences, like going back to like DIY and like kind of like that community building of just like letting like locals and just like random like people just like open up for you and like keeping that culture alive. Like pop is like super cool as well.
Oh, absolutely. Oceanator have been putting out some stuff like not huge, but like they're being released on polyvinyl records. So like it's definitely like a bit of a bigger thing, but it's definitely kind of got that like DIY type of mentality to it, you know? Like polyvinyl isn't a huge record label by any means. They're still like independent, but like a lot of the bands that they signed tend to be like a little bit more developed, I guess, established by the time they take them on.
I always like finding like labels, how they work, and like kind of like how that relates to music, like very fascinating. Just as like an area, honestly, and like seeing how everything plays and like interacts with each other.
Especially like in the independent side of things, because like there's a lot of independent labels, and they kind of go from like something like Lonely Ghost or something like that, where they've got a few bands on the roster. They help with funding like physicals and things like that, but like are pretty hands-off with like, the very hands-off with the creative process and anything like that, versus like, some of the bigger ones. I don't know if they have any sort of like they've definitely got more reach with like a label like Polyvinyl, but I don't know like how they operate in terms of like creative influence, if there's anything like that. But yeah, I do find that interesting. Again, this whole album I think is phenomenal. It's kind of funny. I looked at it on Bandcamp and almost bought the vinyl for it in the middle of this recording because there's only 2 left.
I mean, gotta snipe it while you can. That's all I'm saying.
But it's just a great 35-minute album. It goes from like a lot of this like kind of upbeat, very fun stuff, but there's also songs like Home for the Weekend, which is like right in the middle of the album, that's like a bit slower, and I just really love the way that this album flows. It's phenomenal.
I need to listen to so much music after this.
That's how I feel every time. So how are we closing this episode out? How are we bringing it on home?
So as tradition of picking weird and random songs, I went into the Cybgrind Discord and just picked a random song. Do I know anything about it? Nope.
Wow. All right, we're going in blind.
Exactly. All I know is I believe we can listen to it on here. So hopefully, yep. So it's called What You Are Given by the band called Hitbox on their, I believe, newest record, No Light Shows Through, No Sound Escapes.
You think I'm hideous, don't you?
Tighten your belt, make yourself thin. Try to survive when you are not welcome. By your end up, that could be rough. You will leave nothing behind when you die. It's all a game, and you're not a someone. It's all a dragon, just a meeting. Sincerity dead, the crowd is driving. The paper it says everything is alright.
That might be beef.
I don't give a fuck. That might be human.
That was a very interesting end to that.
The sounds of some gory viscera there at the end. I wonder if that's like if it's a sample of like it sounds like maybe a video game sample or something like that.
Or like some type of like horror movie from like the 90s or something like that.
Yeah. But man, for a blind pick, that was incredible.
It had like really cool like sasscore vocals on like just straight up like blast beats. And that was just like, honestly, for like just random, like picking a random song off a random Discord somewhere, that was super like well executed.
Yeah, honestly, when you said, it's just a random one from the Discord, I'm like, oh boy, I was preparing myself for the worst, and I was very pleasantly surprised. This was incredible. Just like, again, the blast beats and just, fucking tremolo picking their asses off, and it just sounds incredible.
And then like going into like a fax machine, breaking up into like just glitching out was just like super cool, and like how it blended all together with like all those different types of effects was also like super well executed while still being like this harsh type of sound that just blended super well.
Yeah, looking into it, it looks like they are a duo from Michigan and Oklahoma, which is interesting. So I'm assuming that they probably met online, but you never know. Maybe they knew each other and somebody moved or something. But for just like a I'm curious how they split this up. If one of them's like a vocalist and the other does like most of the instrumentation. I would imagine one of them's a guitarist and one of them's a drummer, and then one of them does vocals as well. But
I think you are right of how you explained that. We're looking at their Twitter really fast. It looks like one does like guitar and like voice, while the other one does like primarily like drums and like voice and probably like bass guitar as well.
You know, this rounds back to something that we were talking about just before we started recording, which is where you said that like some of the best, most heavy music you can't find anything about, and you're like, oh yeah, their bio is usually like one sentence, and that's exactly what this is on Spotify. Army of Two from Oklahoma and Michigan, and then it's just a link to their Twitter, and that's all that it says on their Twitter too. This is so funny that it happens to like loop back around to what we were just like talking about, shooting the shit before we started recording. That's so funny.
Like, the less a band has in their Spotify bio, the harder it's about to hit. That's not like how you know you just found like a really great band.
It reminds me of something that I saw like forever ago, but it was somebody was like, oh, you think that, you know, X band is the best band to ever exist? The best band to ever exist was probably a group of people that you have never heard of from the middle of nowhere that played like 5 shows and then just like disappeared because they were, you know, in the middle of nowhere and couldn't get any traction.
It kind of reminds me of like the emo revival of like Snowing and stuff, where it's just like a bunch of these bands that have been known as like the greatest bands ever were only like known as the greatest bands ever like 10 years past like them doing their thing, because at the time they were just like middle of nowhere Midwest, just trying their best to get these like really creative songs out there and playing shows like barely like anyone. And like at the time while they were like together, they barely had like any traction, but they were just like making music just to make music. And only like 10 years after the fact did people go, wow, did you check out this band called Snowing? Like, this was like the greatest record ever. And like things of like that nature, and like how it like just grew like almost like post-mortem.
I've said this forever, that the most influential bands are almost never popular, because if you're going to be influential, you have to like really kind of do something new, and people aren't necessarily going to gravitate towards that right away. You'll have people who do gravitate towards it, and they will probably be influenced by that music, and that will be the music that gets popular. And so like I feel like a lot of the bands that like push genres forward the most are only ever like appreciated as much as they should be after the fact.
Yeah, like I think like a really like great example of that is like American football. Like when they were like first made in like the middle of nowhere, trying to make like this Midwest emo type of sound, it was just like no one really like cared for it. But then like 5 to 10 years later, a lot of people start citing it as like one of their biggest inspirations, and then like a lot of those bands started blowing up, and then that brought up American football with them. And now like American football is like a very common name now versus like when they started and were just like beginning out, they were just like no one really cared then about what they were making or like trying to make.
Well, yeah,
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, because they released an EP and an album in the late 90s, and then didn't do anything until 2016, when everybody was like, this is the best band ever, you know, and then like almost like forced them into like coming out of retirement. And then like that was when they reached legend status. It is really interesting how you will just like randomly see those, and that's also like the independent scene, and like I feel like you maybe don't see it quite as much, but like the college radio station culture and like that kind of stuff, where there are people who, if you make contact with the right people, they will be like, oh, this shit was cool. But it's not necessarily going to like turn into anything right away. I kind of going back to what you were talking about with like some of the bands right now that are like just taking off, that like were working for a number of years, kind of didn't get any traction, and then just kind of like popped off.
Yeah, it's honestly like just really cool to see like a lot of these bands and their like hard work while they're like active not necessarily like perform the best like analytically, but they're just doing it for like the love of the music. And like people recognize that like after the fact that they were like an active band, and like have gravitated them towards mass just because of like the passion and the love that they had for making music. I think like one of the biggest examples of just like this post-mortem like absolute explosion was modern baseball, just as an example of like while they were going, they were just like they only cared about like the music and like the community they were making around them. And then only like after the fact, they blew up to like this million monthly listener band. And just, I feel like people are just attracted to like kind of like that passion, like that influence.
Yeah. Which again can kind of like screw you in like the time that you're like actually working, because like, you know, you might not get as many opportunities as somebody who like, you know, is more into like the marketing a lot more aggressively or whatever. But I think that that's just the nature of music and art in general, is some things are going to catch on, other things aren't going to be fully appreciated until afterwards. That's been the cycle of art for millennia. So I think it's very interesting to just kind of be watching that in the current time. And that's something that I always kind of think about too, is like, you know, you have people who are significantly older than us, but who were like, oh yeah, I saw My Chemical Romance for $5 in like a, 100 cap venue, something like that. And you never know what band is going to turn into that for you. If you're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember seeing this band play, like the very first set at Coachella and Howard's Bar in this year, and then suddenly they're like, 20 years later, the biggest band ever or whatever. I think it's really interesting to kind of like have that perspective and like be in that moment now.
Yeah, like just like getting in like current bands are just like active as well, instead of just like maybe listening to like past bands, like getting like involved into like the current scene and like supporting people, so you can be like, I knew this band before like X event or like Y event, and like be like super excited to just like watch their growth and like be along for that ride and like that culture. And I think that is like probably like one of the coolest parts about DIY, just like watching everyone grow into like either like a new musician or like a new space where they can play like bigger venues. Like Hot Mulligan, for example, like opened up for Fall Out Boy this past year. And like that's just like insane to think about, because I've been listening to like 4 or 5 years now, and like it is just like such an insane ride to like go from like where they were playing like kind of nowhere bars to playing and opening for Fall Out Boy in stadiums. And I feel like that is a large part of like DIY culture, as like playing and like supporting people. It's just like appreciating like the success of others.
Yeah, I mean, you got to celebrate everybody's successes, because what does your own success mean if, nobody cares, right? I think that's a good place to end it on. This has been a good episode. Is there anything else that you want to hit on one last time before we sign off for the episode?
I guess like the only thing is just like go, because we're on the Fresh Finds podcast, right? Like just go and listen to a bunch of like new and like random music and just support artists like when you can. If you're not already doing that, and just like exploring like the entire like culture and like getting involved will like significantly like change like your perspective on music and like make you more passionate about the music that you do listen to, I feel like.
100%. And on that note, this has been the Fresh Finds Podcast, the show about discovering new music with good people.